Hello and welcome back to Mom Chats podcast. I am very excited about today's conversation. We have my friend Jamen Vidal on here, and I'll let her introduce herself in a second, but we have already been just talking. We're like, okay, we just need to stop talking because we need to save all these great points and conversations for when we're actually recording. So very excited for this conversation. Also just very fresh. I feel like I'm just like also asking questions and processing so many things just even for myself. So very excited about it and so thankful that you are here and you have tuned in. So Jamen, you want to start with just introducing a little bit of who you are?
Yeah, well, first off, thanks Ken for inviting me. I'm super excited to get to share a little bit about my story. I'm Jamen, as Ken mentioned. I have the best husband, Alejandro. We've been married for a little over 3 years, and we have the cutest little dog and the best son, James, who is Earthside, and we have a little baby in heaven, who we had a miscarriage when I was 6 weeks pregnant, so that's a little bit of our family. I've been in Fresno, Clovis area since we got married, so pretty new to the Valley, but have just really loved the community here, and just really excited to be able to talk to you a little bit about my story.
Yes, perfect. Okay. Also, I feel like we've already had to preface obviously very good friends and have done life together for the past 3 a little bit more years since you've lived here. So we're like, okay, no inside jokes. Try to keep it all try to keep us on a time schedule and all the things, which is great. So starting us off, what is the biggest lie you believed going into motherhood?
Such a good question. I think there are so many. I mean, I think the biggest thing for me is that you have to do it like other people do it. I think I learned pretty quickly, and I'm the kind of person who can be easily influenced by social media and things like that, and just realizing that you do not have to do it like anybody else does it. You can do it how you do it. And I think the biggest way I've noticed that is no one cares if your kid was breastfed or formula fed. When you're 20 years old, were you breastfed?
No one's gonna ask.
I can tell, but they can tell if you were loved, right? And
that's so good.
So I think that's just a small example, but for me it was oh, this is how this person's doing it. They put their kid to bed at this time. I need to do it. And it's that's so painful for you when you don't feel like you're getting it right because everyone else is doing it that way. And so I just feel that was the biggest lie. I have to do this. I have to get the, he hates the love everything. It's this, gym that everyone has, which I had, and I bought it. He hates it. He likes the $30 one from Amazon. That is so obnoxious. But, you just, you don't have to do it like anybody else. And I think that's okay. And just, realizing there's a lot of freedom and, you are entrusted with this child. You have it. You have what it takes to do it. And so, not to, get bogged down, it's okay if you do it differently.
For sure.
So I think that was, for me, the biggest thing. But I'm still learning every day.
Totally. I'm so dead at the love everything.
Yeah, I'm he doesn't
I remember you saying that.
Yeah.
That's so funny. Okay, what is something sweet you never expected?
I for sure thought that, having a kid was going to cause the greatest strain on my marriage. And just because I've had this belief, or again, I guess another lie, that, I'm going to know how to do it better. My husband, I'm going to, question everything he does. How does he have any concept of, parenthood? I'm the parent. And that's just not true. Yeah. He is so good with James and, can calm him down in ways that I can't. And he just has these ideas, and I'm that's absolutely ridiculous. And they work. And I think it's just been so sweet to be humbled in that way and, challenged in that way. And, just know that God has equipped him as well, and just seeing him become a dad has been something I wasn't I knew it was going to be sweet, but it's just way sweeter. And also just the partnership that you get at 3 a.m. and you are both Googling and you don't know what you're doing. You to be with someone and you're wow, we really have no idea what we're doing. Yeah. And that's okay. And just to laugh at that has been really, really sweet.
I love that you brought up marriage, because I feel with motherhood and parenting, it's easy to just focus on the kid, right? And it's just okay, yeah, we're married obviously, but that's not the priority. And I love that is what is something sweet that you've noticed in that, because I feel that's such a unique perspective, but it's also so cool.
Right. Well, and I it was completely unexpected. I expected the opposite. I'm this is gonna mess up our marriage, and I know that can happen with so that's totally valid and real, but for us that didn't happen, and I'm really thankful for it. But yeah.
Totally.
And a lot of highs in it and a lot of lows though. So
for sure.
And like working through those has been really, really cool too.
For sure. Yeah. Okay. Well, obviously you touched on this very briefly, like whenever you like did your quick intro and your story, but having a miscarriage before having a baby.
Yeah.
I want to like talk through that,
Yeah.
and because I feel like it's a relatable thing. A lot of people have experienced that, and maybe it's public and maybe it's not.
Right.
Which I love that you and Alejandro were public with
Yeah.
it. It wasn't like, which it's okay for it to be a private thing as you're like processing and healing and all the things, and so many of the emotions are.
Yeah.
But I love that it was something that you guys allowed it to be like your community got to rally alongside of you. So I want to touch on that a little bit.
Yeah.
But really quick, just for context, we had babies 6 weeks apart, which is the best.
Yeah.
They're parent proclaimed best friends.
Yep.
So we really hope that one day they actually grow up to be best friends because we like make them hang out together and lay on the ground. That's all they can do right now.
They haven't quite figured it out yet, though.
Yeah, they're still confused by each other, but we got to have babies 6 weeks apart, and they're both boys, which is just the best. So anyways, quick context with that. And then kind of jumping into, I don't know, is there anything just off the bat that you want to share on like, okay, miscarriage before having a baby? How does that even affect your mind when you are pregnant? Like, are there fears? I don't even know.
I think the biggest thing, well, first of all, is like, for someone who might be listening, like, this is just one experience of miscarriage. Like, everyone's situation is completely different. So, like, what works for me might not work for somebody else. And so I think it's just important to, like, recognize that this is just my experience and like I don't want, if I have some ideas and techniques and tips on like how to support somebody, but like that might not work for somebody and that's okay.
Right.
But I think the biggest thing that I've realized in now being a parent and after a miscarriage is like you want this gift so bad that you feel like when you have it, you always have to be happy. Like you can't discuss like the struggle or like like not necessarily like, oh, this like complaining or whatever, because I know that can be really hard, but just this idea that like I wanted this so badly, I finally got it, and now when it is hard, I have to like silence those things in me. And like that is just, I feel like not putting light to what's hard. Like how can you heal from that? How can you grow from that? So that is probably like top of mind, the first thing I think about when like, oh gosh, I got the thing I wanted and this is way harder than I thought. Like,
totally. Wow.
What do I do? What do I do with that? And so I think like having opportunities like this to share, that's why I wanted to share it on social media and just like with people, is that miscarriage is so common. Like so many people have reached out to me privately who've told me that they've had miscarriages. They just didn't feel comfortable sharing about them. Like,
wow, I love that you can be that.
Right.
I feel like for your own story, that just makes it so much more
Yeah.
worth it. Of like, yes, it was hard. It sucked. There was so much healing.
Right.
But because I was the one that was, able to share it, then now I get to be the one that people come to. That's cool.
Well, and I have the, like, I can't not admit the fact that, like, I had the resources to be able to share that, right? Like, I had people in my life that made me feel really loved and supported that I could share something like that, right? Like, not everyone has that, and so like I wanted to become more normalized, whatever you're going through, to be able to share it in a way that's like, this is hard, like here's my pain, like has someone else gone through this, in a way to like, hey, I've gone through that too, we got this, we can do this, like I know this is hard, you don't have to be happy, but like you can get through it,
yeah that's so good. Wow.
But yeah, I think that was the biggest thing so far.
Okay, before you got pregnant with James, I remember obviously like after the miscarriage, just processing things. I remember you telling me that it was hard whenever people would be like, oh, your miracle's coming, right? Which like of course their heart was so pure and being like, like that sucks, I don't how do I help you? I'm trying to encourage you. But I remember you being like, oh, that's like hard. So what would you say to the friends who maybe have a friend in this situation, like how to encourage and be there? Like, is it just to be quiet and be there and pray for them? Are there things that I don't know, and I know it's different for every person, but just like a practical tool that maybe isn't as triggering? No, that I'm so glad you asked that. I think the biggest thing is like just taking a step back as the person who's had this miscarriage is the example of pain, right? And then the person who might not have experienced is like, there is no rule book for this, right? Like you don't know how you're gonna respond, and you also can't like be so angry at your friend for however they're trying, because there's no rule book. There is no way to figure that out. And so I think just having a lot of grace for yourself for having the emotions, and then for the people who are trying to be in your life, and like saying, hey, like actually that like isn't the most helpful, but thank you for being there for me. And I think
it was super triggering when people would come up to me and say, like, oh, it's coming. Like, you don't know that. Like, there are millions of people who never got that kind of miracle, right? And so, like,
wow.
It's so kind, it's coming from a good place, but it's, like, being a little bit more tangible, like, I know this is hard, or I can't even imagine how hard this is, right? If you can't, like, if haven't maybe gone through it, how can I tangibly help you? Like, oh, I know someone just posted they're having a baby. This is probably hard for this person. I'm gonna like, hey, let me get you dinner tonight. You don't even need to say why, right? Like, don't even put it on them to have to explain how they're feeling. But just kind of like trying to have the foresight of like, these things may be hard for somebody. How can I like make their day just a little bit brighter? Because you're never gonna fix the hole, right? Like, nothing you say is gonna fix the gaping hole of what you want, right? And so definitely the other thing is, don't ever say like at least to somebody. Like, at least you could get pregnant. Like, I had people say that to me, and it was such good like intent, right? Because there are people who haven't been able to, and it's like, oh, there's no at least in any of this. Like, it's just pain, right? And so I think just being able to like, hey, I know these things are hard. If you need to take boundaries and this is more for the person who's having the miscarriage, right? Like, if you need to not be at things, or, you know, we'll talk a little bit about that, or like block people for a little bit. There's these things on social media where they won't even know, right? Like, protect your heart. There's nothing wrong with that. Yeah. And like, because it isn't about, oh, I'm mad, I don't want it for that person. You just also want it for you. Right. And so I would just say for the friends, like, I've had, you know, amazing friends who've been really thoughtful and like checked in first, like, hey, like this happened with us. You had your gender reveal and you like called me beforehand, and we were like, hey, I know this is happening. I want you to come, but if you don't feel up to it, like, that's totally okay. I probably wouldn't have come if you hadn't called me. Right. Because it would have just, I wouldn't have been able to like process or prepare. But because you like made a mention of like, I know this is hard, you have the option, I felt so seen, and I felt like empowered to like, I can be who I am there. Right. You know, like, I don't want to bring you down. Right. And that's another thing, is like, maybe someone's not going because they don't want to bring down the mood, but it's just sometimes too hard. So
for sure, yeah.
That was a lot.
I know, yeah, which is such a good answer. So quick context of like how we were even jumping into this before we were even recording. We found out we were pregnant just a little bit before Jamin and Alejandro. And so for me, it was like obviously exciting. It was exciting for both of us. But also it was like hard to like tell her and be excited, because it was like, I know we all so badly want this for you too, right? And so it's like the balance between like celebrating but also being like considerate about the season that you're in, which I was so thankful that I got to process that a little bit with you. And it was literally only a matter of weeks, which isn't a long time, like looking back in the rearview mirror, but it felt like a long time. Like whenever it was happening, like we were just even saying like this time last year. Yeah, I didn't even know. Jamin she was pregnant, but she hadn't found out yet. And so it was just like that in between phase of like, okay, like being excited with the whole gender reveal thing of like, of course I'd want you there, but I also don't want it to be like a triggering emotional thing, which it definitely could be, and understandably could be. Right. And so I'm so thankful that like I got to process that with you a little bit, maybe not as like intensely as we've gotten to process it now, but a little bit at the time I was like, how do I navigate this? Like being a good friend and, you know, learning all of the things.
Right. Well, and the thing is, how would you know how to handle that? Right. Like, the only thing you can do is try. And I think that's another encouragement for people, is just like, don't be silent, right? Like, praying for people is great, but like, the silence feels so loud sometimes, of like, everyone knows we're going through this. Right. And like, you might not say the right thing, but like saying something is helpful. And it doesn't necessarily have to be like, oh, you're going to get this. And people probably had, you know, senses that it would happen, and I'm glad it did. Right. But like, just, hey, I'm here for you. I love you. I know this is hard. Totally. Like, I see that. People just want to be seen. Yeah. And so I would say that I did feel really seen. That's so sweet. Well, I'm glad, because I was like, how do I do this respectfully? Yeah. Which I'm obviously so thankful that we got to share like so much of our pregnancy journey together, which was just the best. And then both getting to have boys has just been amazing. So are there any other like thoughts that you would want to share, either for the friend who, you know, just found out they were pregnant, or the friend who is still trying? Like, I don't know, just how to navigate that. I think too, like, just to be like totally real, is that like when you do have a friend who's trying, or had a miscarriage or whatever, is like, when you tell them that you're having it, maybe like not do it in like a public place, or like give them an opportunity to really process that, because like obviously they want to be excited for you or who forever, and sometimes you just can't control your emotions, right? And like some people can, and that's great, but I would just say like be really mindful, or give people the space to process however they need to. And so like maybe it might be like a phone call or a text or something, and like just not necessarily have to like put them in a position to react in front of other people, because it might not be that great of a reaction.
Right. Understandably.
And, you know, and like everyone understands, I feel like, but it's just, I know that like there have been situations before where it's like, oh, now I have to act really happy for however long at this party or whatever it is that it's shared at, when like you're dying inside, because you're like, oh,
so badly.
like, it's just so painful.
Totally.
So, yeah.
Okay, now transitioning into the pregnancy side of like finding out you're pregnant with James, which I've gotten to see that video, which is just the best video ever. Couple things. What was your first like thoughts, obviously, in that?
For me, it was like I really wanted to get pregnant in 2021. Like that's something I was like, I want it to be this year, and I knew this is like our last chance. And so when I took it on like January 4th, I was like, there's just no way, like it's just not gonna happen. And so I took a video of it just as like, oh, we'll see. And I looked terrible, like you could tell I was not ready to be filmed, but I'm like, it's not gonna happen, so it doesn't really matter what I look like. And when it was, I was just like so shocked, and like it was more of like God, as a person of faith, obviously God fulfilled a promise that like of it being in that year, like it was the last possible chance. And obviously we had the baby in 2022, but like the fact that like that year ended with joy, even though there was so much pain in it, felt really like full circle. And then like fear crept in.
Right. That was gonna be my next question.
Yeah, like pretty much immediately. We ended up getting COVID like a couple weeks after that. So I'm like so newly pregnant with COVID, like had a really hard miscarriage like situation, like a lot of pain and stuff like that. So like I was just like, is this gonna happen again? And for a lot of my pregnancy, thank God for like my husband who's really level-headed, but you kind of feel like, oh, it's just not gonna work out. And I think just being really open about that, like to people, of like, I have a lot of fears. Like this doesn't feel joyful. I'm not like, I don't want to get too excited, because what happens if it doesn't work out, you know?
Right.
And so there was a lot of joy, but there was a lot of like, you're walking in joy and pain at the same time. And I think that's just kind of how life is. And I've gotten to like really embrace that, of like, there's a difference between, I think, being happy all the time and like joyful. Like joyful, I feel like is so much more long term.
Wow,
like
yeah.
I know that there is good, I know that there's gratitude, I know that there is like hope and healing, but this still really sucks. And so I feel like that's kind of the life I want to live. I want to be able to like be honest and open about like pain and hard things, in a way that like can be hopeful and encouraging, but also real.
For sure.
And so that's kind of like, that's how pregnancy has been. Even now with like James, I'm like, oh, like, is something gonna happen? Like, what, you know, because you just
learn. I love that we're talking about this, because I feel like when I was pregnant, I would just be like, oh my gosh, I cannot wait for Dawson to be here, you know, because I can just see that he is okay. Right. You know, like he's not just like inside of me. Like obviously whenever he got bigger and I was still pregnant with him, I could feel him move, and that was like a reassuring feeling, you know. But I just kept being like, okay, I cannot wait for him to be out of me, because I can literally just like see him like opening his eyes or moving his arm or breathing, and like he's good, you know. But I feel like the fear has like almost even escalated in a sense to be like, he was so safe inside of me.
Like you were good in there,
Like you had food and everything you needed like immediately then. Like if you needed to take a nap, you could just take a nap, you know? Like whatever it was. But now it's like, okay, now you're like out and about. Now we're in cars. Now we're like, you know, doing like all the things. And so I feel like I have that same thought like daily, and I have to fight it of like, oh, is he okay? Like, should I go check on him during his nap? Is he, you know? And I feel like that's been something that I've really been processing through the Lord, of just like fear in motherhood. Now getting to talk to people about it, it's like a common thing, but maybe not that commonly talked about, but it's like a common mind game. I feel like that is commonly happens in the sense of just like, oh, is my baby okay? Which it's only going to continue for the rest of their life. They're only going to get bigger. They're only going to start walking. They're only going to start riding bikes, like all the things. But I feel like it's a constant resurrender to the Lord of like, he is faithful. He is a good gift giver. He does not withhold from us. There's not like, he's not dangling the carrot in front of us of like, oh, you can only have it for, you know? So I feel like it's a constant reminder of like reminding ourselves of his character, that he's a good gift giver, that he, you know, keeps his promises. But it is a constant,
it really
constant mind game of all the things.
I think at the end of the day, like, just being like, oh my gosh, you too. Like, you think that too, right? Like, I'm not the only one. I'm not crazy. I'm like, you feel so alone sometimes. And I think just to be able to like, oh, you too. It's so freeing to know, okay, this is normal. And also like, how did you get through that? Like, what are your techniques? What are your, like, how, you know, praying with each other, like over our kids and things like that. Like that, bringing those things into the light, I think has been the biggest like thing, or my biggest takeaway from like all of this is like, everyone is kind of going through the same thing sometimes. And even if you're not, like, just being open about it, it's like, oh, okay.
I'm not the only one.
You're not alone. You know, it's, I think, huge.
Totally. Oh, it's so good. Okay, well, I loved this conversation. I feel like this is going to be so encouraging to so many people. Do you have any last closing thoughts, any encouragement maybe for somebody who is still in the waiting or in the in-between?
I think to be my biggest piece of advice or encouragement is just like, don't go at it alone, right? Like, I think anything, whether you're miscarriage or not, can be so isolating if you're just like, I'm just gonna keep this to myself. And people have reasons for that, right? Like, I get that, but like, I think for me, what I learned is like, had I done that alone, I would have villainized so many people in my head of like, oh, they just get whatever and I don't, and you lose the humanity between people, and like, you also just don't let, you know, the Lord into it, the light into it. You don't let other people into what can be a really dark situation. And so like, I know that it can come off really negative when like people are dealing with miscarriage or whatever. It's like, oh, they're always so sad about that one thing, you know? And like, it's hard to be friends with people who are going through hard things sometimes, but I would just say like, find your people, be open about what you're feeling, and like, I guess like, you're going to be, I feel like, pleasantly surprised by how people can be there for you even in the hard stuff. For sure. Which, I mean, like, in the Bible, it literally says that, like, as we get to participate in suffering, we also get to participate in glory, right? And so, like, even if it's not our own suffering, even if it's, like, you know, coming alongside somebody and we don't understand the depth of the pain, but we can still be there. Totally. I think that's so good and so encouraging. Okay, well, today's conversation was amazing. So fun. Thank you so much. Thanks for doing this. Okay, well, we love you guys, and we will see you next week with another episode. Bye, y'all.